George's eyes were going back and forth between the pacing dog and his wife, Zoe. His eyes were filled with a silent worry as he looked on. They had agreed to dog-sit Rex, their friend Corey's well-behaved pooch. George and Zoe had expected an easy time, and indeed the initial days were a breeze. However, the peace didn't last long. The house was silent except for Rex's constant movement. The dog was acting strange, walking back and forth erratically, looking like he could pounce at any moment. George felt uneasy, not knowing what to expect. Both he and Zoe had little experience with dogs, especially such large ones. Rex kept pacing back and forth, his eyes darting around the room as if tracking something only he could see. The hair on his back bristled, and a low growl rumbled in his throat. A feeling of dread crept over George. Rex's behavior signaled that something was very wrong. But what was it? Why was Rex so focused on Zoe? Before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any news stories. From the moment Rex entered their home, he stayed by Zoe's side, showing an unusual level of interest. This obsessive behavior unsettled George, and he knew something didn't add up. And then on top of that, there was the text message. George felt Zoe's eyes on him. Was she hiding something? Her smile seemed forced, not reaching her eyes. This just wasn't right, and he was determined to find out what was going on. During Rex's first days here, everything was calm and ordinary. Rex behaved perfectly normal. Zoe, showing her affection, frequently played with Rex on warm afternoons in their small garden. Meanwhile, George was immersed in his own world of work and routine. Everything seemed normal. At least, that's what George believed. But then, a quiet change swept through their home. Rex started acting differently, becoming strangely attached to Zoe. He would watch her every move, his intense stare creating an unsettling atmosphere. George started to feel an unexplainable unease. One morning, sunlight filtered through the gaps in the curtains, gently illuminating the room. George was still sleeping, but a soft sound from Zoe's phone woke him up. Stirred from his slumber, he opened his eyes and glanced at the softly lit screen of her phone. A new message had popped up. George knew he should respect Zoe's privacy. It was an unspoken rule, but something powerful, a mix of curiosity and an eerie sense of unease, gripped him. He couldn't resist the urge any longer and started unlocking her phone. The message was from a number George didn't recognize. It wasn't saved in Zoe's phone. With a pounding heart, George read the first few words. The message read, "You've told me that I can't tell George about this and that you'll tell him when the time is right, so that's The message abruptly ended there. He had to open the message to read it entirely, but that could mean Zoe discovering he was snooping around. Suddenly, Zoe started to stir. She was waking up. George hastily locked the phone and returned it to her pillow. A whirlwind of questions swirled around in his mind. What was Zoe hiding from him? The next few days were tough for George. He started to doubt everything Zoe did and said. George noticed many signs that Zoe was behaving strangely and he couldn't ignore them. However, it wasn't as he initially thought that she had cheated on him. It was something much worse. So when he reported his concerns to the police, they took them seriously and arrived at their house promptly. The situation escalated quickly upon their arrival. They asked a lot of questions. Zoe looked trapped under the hard stares of both the officers and George. But as they talked, surprising truth started coming out. Every mystery, from Rex's behavior and Zoe's secret trips to the strange text message, was getting solved. George was hearing answers he wasn't ready for, answers that could change their lives, and they were nothing like he could have ever expected. And to think that all of this began with a simple text message just a couple of weeks ago. That particular day, George was enjoying a quiet evening at home when his phone buzzed. It was Corey, his best friend, who was about to leave on a long work trip abroad. The problem? Corey's dog Rex, a retired police Doberman, couldn't travel with him, and the regular sitter had canceled last minute due to a family emergency. With no time to waste, Corey decided to bring Rex directly to George's house. Once there, Corey explained the situation. He asked George if he could take care of Rex for 2 weeks. As they spoke, Zoe walked in. Corey, hoping she'd be more persuadable, turned his attention to her, offering reassurances about Rex's training and calm nature. Initially hesitant, Zoe softened when she saw Rex's gentle demeanor and agreed. With Zoe on board, George quickly followed. Corey was visibly relieved. George and Zoe, unaware of what was to come, laughed it off and reassured Corey they could handle it. At first, things went smoothly. Rex adjusted well, and the house felt full of positive energy. But the peace didn't last. Within days, Rex's behavior changed. He began barking at night and scratching at their bedroom door. The calm dog they had welcomed had turned into a source of anxiety. Hoping for answers, George called Corey, who was just as confused. Corey suggested that Rex was likely stressed due to being in a new environment without him and recommended patience. The explanation seemed reasonable. George and Zoe tried to give Rex more time to adjust. Thankfully, over the next few days, Rex calmed down and returned to his usual obedient self. Then one morning as Zoe was getting ready, Rex wandered into their bedroom. She didn't give it much thought. She was used to his quiet presence. As Zoe slipped on her socks, Rex's silent gaze went unnoticed, a familiar backdrop to her morning routine. Yet, when she lifted her eyes, Rex stood right before her and did something she would have never expected from him. A shiver ran down her spine, shattering the tranquil atmosphere and bringing back the unsettling unease she believed had vanished. A low growl filled the room, and before Zoe could react, Rex lunged. The weight of the Doberman knocked her back onto the bed, pinning her down. Her heart pounded. This was not the dog they had come to trust. Helpless and terrified, Zoe screamed. George rushed in, stunned by what he saw. He grabbed Rex's collar and yanked him off her, locking the dog out of the room. Zoe, breathless and shaken, couldn't believe what had just happened. The trust she had in Rex was gone. "We need to call Corey," she demanded, her voice breaking. But George remembered Corey was unreachable for a few days. They were alone with a dog who had suddenly become a threat. The house felt different now, shadowed by confusion and unease. Why was Rex acting this way? Sitting in front of his computer, George searched for answers. He read about airport police dogs, trying to find anything that could explain Rex's sudden aggression and strange attachment to Zoe. But the more he read, the more questions arose. He stayed alert, watching her quietly. One morning while pretending to sleep, he saw her sneak out of bed. Rex followed her, softly barking. George slipped out, trailing her silently. She drove off with Rex in the back seat, her demeanor tense. George followed at a distance, heart pounding. She pulled into a quiet gas station and vanished inside. George waited, confusion growing. She hadn't bought gas. What was she doing? When she finally left, George rushed to a nearby bakery, buying bread to explain his absence. As he arrived home, George tried to act as though everything was normal. He didn't want to raise any suspicions with Zoe. However, his mind couldn't shake the odd text message and the strange way Zoe had slipped away from the gas station. The following days were stressful. Zoe was often gone, and the house felt quiet and different. One day, George came home to an empty house. Zoe was gone again, and Rex had torn up a cushion. As George cleaned up the mess, his phone rang. A deep voice on the line asked, "Are you the guy looking after my old police dog, Rex?" Caught off guard, George replied yes. The voice gave a chilling warning, "Stop poking around, you're in over your head." Then the call ended. George stared at the phone, stunned. Who was that man? What did he know? Shaken, George left the house to clear his head. When he returned, Zoe was irritated by the mess. "Where have you been all day?" she asked sharply. George gave a vague answer, but Zoe didn't believe him. The irony of her suspicion hit George hard. Their conversation turned into an argument. They clashed over Rex and the couch, but it was clear deeper issues were bubbling to the surface. George came close to confronting her about the gas station. George instructed Zoe to go upstairs. George, feeling the threat, called the police. Zoe overheard George on the phone with someone, then calling the police. The strange man's voice at the door left her shaken. She didn't know who he was or why he wanted her. George's voice echoed through the house. "Zoe, the police are here. They want to talk to you." Her heart pounded as she descended the stairs with Rex at her heels. She expected to discuss the intruder, but what awaited her was far more shocking. Two police officers stood by the door, looking at her intently. Her stomach dropped. George said, "Zoe, I called the police because of you." Her eyes widened. "What?" "I know what's going on," he said, avoiding her gaze. "It's time to stop lying." George confronted her with everything, her secret outings, the strange message, and Rex's odd behavior. His research revealed that Rex had been a drug detection dog. "Are you involved in something illegal, Zoe?" George asked, his voice trembling with disbelief. One of the police officers interjected, "Ma'am, is there something you'd like to tell us?" Zoe, hurt and angry, stared at George. "So, you invade my privacy and accuse me of being a criminal based on a dog's behavior and a text message?" she asked, her voice trembling. Then, sighing deeply, she sat down. "All right, George, since you've made such a scene, here's the truth." She began to explain. A few days earlier, she had read an article about how dogs can sense pregnancy. Rex's odd behavior made her wonder if that could be the case. She texted an old friend for advice, someone who had experienced the same thing. Her friend confirmed that her dog had also behaved strangely before she discovered she was pregnant. With that in mind, Zoe had quietly gone to a gas station to buy a pregnancy test. To her shock, it came back positive, but fear kept her silent. Her family had a history of early miscarriages, and she wanted to wait until the risk was lower before telling George. As she finished, the room was thick with awkwardness. George looked devastated. One officer tried to lighten the moment. "Congratulations are in order, but sir, maybe a little more trust next time." Zoe stroked Rex's ears. Despite the chaos, she still had hope that she and George could repair their broken trust. They had promised to stand by each other for better or worse, and now, more than ever, she wanted to raise this child together as a family.